Sound check presenter's laptop, sound check presenter's laptop. Clerk's laptop, sound check, clerk's laptop, sound check.
Councillor Ferguson, you're live.
Okay, thanks very much, Madam Clerk, and welcome to the January 25th ongoing budget proceedings. The quorum is present and would like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived by the city's website. As well as a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to the non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adheres to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require additional time to ask questions or make comments. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, to you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we have one change, and it's the addition of the January 21st, 2022 minutes.
Okay, can I move it a second to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Partridge, seconded by His Worshipfulness, Mayor Eisenberger. Discussion on the minutes. Seeing none, all in favor?
Councillor Powers? Thank you. Councillor Wilson, thank you. Sorry to hear you. Okay. And that carries 12-0.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, I'll move on to item 3.1. Can I have a mover and a seconder to put the minutes of the January 21st GIC on the floor? Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor?
That carries 12-0.
Madam Clerk, let's move on to 6.1, which is the presentation. So Mike Zagaric, General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services, will provide the presentation for item 6.1. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm just going to take a moment to load up my slide presentation here. Great. Thank you. Thanks to committee for your patience. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it's my privilege again and to present the 2022 Corporate Services Preliminary Budget. And I'd like to take a moment just to introduce the Corporate Services Leadership Team who are joining me today. And through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I could suggest, it is a relatively lengthy presentation. If there are any questions, myself and Corporate Services Leadership Team would be happy to answer those questions, possibly at the end of the presentation. I'm joined here today by our City Clerk, Andrea Holland, our Director, Rick Mail, Director Maria McChesney, Director Brian McMullen, Director Cindy Mercanti, our City Solicitor, Stephen Spracklin, and I also want to recognize our FNA Manager, Maya Walters, and her team who aided in the preparation of today's presentation. This slide is just a reminder of the divisions that comprise corporate services and that our corporate services departmental leadership team supports. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank the corporate services leadership team for all their support in 2021 and looking forward to working with them in 2022 as it relates to the body of work and the objectives and outcomes we're hoping to achieve the upcoming year. Within corporate services, our team leads and is responsible for a number of financial management functions, including procurement, property taxation, treasury services, and financial compliance. As city departments and external boards and agencies identify service priorities Corporate Services supports the arrangement of this information so that council and residents have the certainty about the direction of local government services, finances, and tax levels. The IT team leads the execution of the city's IT strategy that supports the delivery of sensational services and timely reporting. We enhance the service experience for citizens, visitors, businesses through the delivery of municipal services at in-person counters, via the telephone, and through emails, as well as providing critical after-hours city emergency phone support. We develop financial investment strategies that will support the city's strong credit rating. We support efforts towards building trust and confidence in local government through the supporting of access to information, as well as supporting the municipal election. We provide expert internal legal advice, as well as manage risk through the acquisition of insurance and the management of claims. And finally, we provide effective administration and prosecution of provincial municipal offenses to ensure the safety of citizens, businesses, and visitors. And through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, this is the work that corporate services staff support. I'll take a few minutes to go through a series of slides as it relates to our 2021 highlights. And looking back at 2021 in the midst of the pandemic and the associated financial challenges, the City of Hamilton was able to maintain our AA plus with a stable outlook credit rating. This is the second highest credit rating available, and it has been maintained since 2017. It's also worth noting that the rating agency suggests that Hamilton's economy is aided by our economic diversity. And in their opinion, our economy will recover as the COVID-19 restrictions are eased. This past year, in response to legislative changes to the DC Act and Planning Act, staff presented recommended amendments to our DC bylaw to our community and council. The approved amendments further supports our strong financial management through an estimated $2 million net increase in our annual DC collections. During 2021, a number of financial policies and programs were reviewed and improved to benefit residents, including our revised water leak adjustment policy and the residential water wastewater warranty protection plan. Through efforts across a number of corporate services divisions, a new budget system was implemented, allowing integration between operating and capital budgets, and therefore more efficient and effective reporting. The 2022 municipal election is being planned. In 2021, staff reviewed relevant policies and led community outreach in an effort to expand participation and accessibility. As a result of this pandemic, corporate services staff have been very responsive to the changing requirements. We've worked with colleagues in the operating departments to ensure employees are paid accurately, time and attendance are recorded accurately, vendors are paid timely and accurately, and the COVID-19 financial impacts are understood and recorded and reported accurately. These are some examples of our response. We've continued implementation of the customer service strategy, which includes enhancements to core digital documents, as well as online licenses and continued call consolidation. We've, through direction of the Ministry of the Attorney General, transferred some responsibilities from the POA judiciary to the clerk of the court. And again, these are just some of the department's 2021 deliverables. This presentation includes a series of metrics intended to communicate our abilities, actions, and quality of work. Marriage in the time of the coronavirus, like many aspects of life, have changed. During the pandemic, city staff continued to support the issuing of marriage licenses, which rebounded in 2021. In 2021, calls to the city customer contact center were slightly below previous year's numbers. But it's important to note that this metric does not include the support the customer contact center provided to the public health hotline in 2021. The number of citizens served at Municipal Service Center are slightly below previous year's numbers due to the centers being closed for a few months during the pandemic. Again, important to note that our Municipal Service Center staff were redeployed in an effort to support the public health hotline, and that is not reflected in this metric. The percentage of taxpayers enrolled in the pre-authorized payment plan declined by about 0.8% in 2020, so that taxpayers could take advantage of the city's approved property tax deferral program. Again, this was in response to the pandemic, and we're seeing some rebounding as it relates to the pre-authorized payment plans. In relation to our IT security strategy, 77% of those emails that were a potential threat were blocked. Security awareness training and phishing training continues to be provided to further address those threats that make it through our email environment. And finally, our gross percentage realized rate of return on investments in 2020 was 2.4%. This translates into about $30 million on an average asset cost of about $1.3 billion. Important to note that the $30 million goes towards our financial sustainability plan, more specifically towards our reserves and the sustainability of our infrastructure reserves. I'll take a few minutes to go through a series of slides as it relates to 2021 highlights, and I'll just thank committee for your patience as I go through this content. The first iteration of the IT strategy is now complete. A number of foundational projects were completed through this body of work, such as our enterprise data management program, where Microsoft BI will be the tool used by staff to access data for information. Our Geographical Information System, or GIS, multi-year plan is completed and is currently being implemented to improve functionality of mobility applications using spatial data. With input from various stakeholders, the citywide electronic document and record management roadmap was developed. Implementation of the mobility strategy that was the outcome of the IT strategy was started. This body of work was critical in supporting pivoting to a remote work environment during this pandemic. We continued to enhance WebEx and Teams, and we adopted Office 365 technology. IT continues to implement the cloud strategy now that phase 1 of the strategy is complete. IT, in collaboration with Hamilton Police Services, completed the assessment of the 911 program. We're now working towards implementation of the next generation 911 program. IT completed the assessment of the IT asset management program in support of the corporate asset management program. We updated the procurement policy and reported on annual fair wage complaints. We're leveraging greater use of technology to support the inclusion on the voter list. And we worked with RBC and Ontario Works to implement the use of right-of-pay cards. These are reloadable credit cards to reduce the issuance of check fraud and risk of fraud while providing ease of use and more flexibility for Ontario Work recipients. Continuing on, in 2021, we implemented the online expense module, reducing manual touch points and decreasing time to make payments of city employee expenses. Bill 66 contained legislation to make municipalities non-construction employers. Procurement worked with HR and outside legal to help to successfully have the carpenters union's grievance dismissed in 2021. We initiated planning for new public sector accounting standards. We introduced enhanced digital court filings that allows residents to file court documents electronically. We implemented a permanent operating model to support virtual trials and enhance early resolution. We optimized funding from senior levels of government Staff monitored announcements, wrote council reports, and submitted applications and submitted interim reports to senior levels of government. And we implemented a new budget system in 2021. In 2021, like 2020, corporate services staff were very responsive to the pandemic. We continued to provide support to public health with the technology required within the clinics. IT worked with public health to implement the citizen-facing COVID-19 dashboard and the city's vaccine booking system, Virto. IT also provided support and enhancements to the phone system to improve the service of the public health COVID hotline. Customer service staff were provided support to the public health hotline, and staff have been very responsive to the changing requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff within corporate services worked with colleagues in the operating departments to ensure employees were paid accurately, timely, and financial impacts were understood and recorded and reported accurately. As mentioned previously, we supported the updating of the DC bylaw as part of the city's corporate-wide climate change effort. A reserve policy was approved by council in 2021 with initial allocation of $1.5 million. And the city of Hamilton was a local leader in piloting a surety bond policy, which protects the city's interests while reducing financial burden on developers from alternatives such as letters of credit. In 2021, we developed enhanced cash handling protocols through an enhanced internal compliance assessment process. As described earlier, we executed the transfer of some responsibilities from the provincial offenses judiciary to provincial offenses staff. For the vacant home tax, public engagement was done in 2021. A report is going to GIC in February of 2022. Staff also supported engagement for changes being proposed in the small business property tax class. Staff held stakeholder engagement with businesses during 2021. A decision is being deferred to 2023. In addition, the 2022 budget included an extra public delegation meeting in November of 2021. As mentioned previously, staff have engaged with the community in an effort to support participation through the 2022 municipal election. In 2021, staff recommended provision of mail-in ballots for the first time, intended to impact equity for accessing voting for all eligible voters. Staff also supported extending virtual participation for the public and council at committee meetings on a permanent basis through amendments to the procedural bylaw. And the routine disclosure and active dissemination project is ongoing, with additions to the city's website happening regularly. I've spoken to a number of technological efforts and financial efforts and support that corporate services have led or provided support during the pandemic. I do want to mention, though, that during 2021, we aligned our work with public health and healthy and safe protocols while supporting staff through access to mental health supports. We also supported the EOC as it relates to the pandemic. Some corporate services staff were redeployed in key areas. We also supported the ability to continue to work remotely. Customer service staff supported call agent support for the public health hotline, and we provided technology solutions to ensure consistent and reliable remote work. I want to just take this moment just to thank all corporate services staff for their responsiveness during the pandemic, including those who have been redeployed during various phases of this pandemic. Looking ahead now to 2022 through 2024, technology will continue to be a theme or area of focus. Now that IT has completed a number of initiatives in the current IT strategy. IT will be focusing towards the development of the next iteration of the IT strategy, or IT Strategy 2.0. IT will support the implementation of the IT asset management policies and procedures. We'll also be implementing a series of upgrades while implementing new business solutions in an effort to improve financial management, and that work will be supported across a series of corporate services divisions. An area of focus of the City and Public Works as the lead will be the new asset management requirements to meet provincial regulations, but more importantly, to support council and staff to prioritize capital investments. We'll be working closely with Public Works and SLT to support that body of work. We'll also be working towards presenting a risk management strategy in 2022 in an effort to identify risks or problems before they occur, as well as to identify opportunities and how to operationalize those opportunities. Staff continue to support the development and review of policies to support the city's long-term financial sustainability, and that work will continue through 2022 through 2024. IT's developed an IT security plan, which specifies requirements for establishing, implementing, and maintaining, and continually improving information security practices within the City of Hamilton. As mentioned previously, we'll be working with Hamilton Police Services as it relates to implementation of next generation 911. Further enhancements are planned to support the continued delivery of courts in a virtual format, specifically a review of the process and formatting of filings, as well as planned introduction of public virtual viewing. For future budgets, we'll be planning for enhanced public and stakeholder engagement through the use of technology. We'll be leading and supporting the 2022 municipal election. We'll be administering the 2022 election. We'll be enhancing communication and outreach. We'll be developing metrics to assess our processes and benchmark performance. We'll be leveraging technology to increase efficiencies, access to information, and improve voter experience. And finally, we'll enhance accessibility of voters. With respect to our privacy program, we'll be developing a new employee onboard in the fall and rollout of a new corporate program. With respect to records management policy and program, policy work will be initiated in 2022, and the program rollout will start in 2023. And with respect to governance review, ongoing work to determine areas of improvement with reporting back to government's committee will continue to be supported in 2022 to 23. We'll be reviewing the terms of references for local boards in an effort towards consistency and approval of local boards' code of conduct. 2022 to 2023 will include new council onboarding, as well as a review of the 2022 corporate information governance. Continuing on with respect to looking ahead 2022 through 2024, we'll be involved with other city departments in the review of the changes to the Conservation Authority Act. We'll be reporting in 2022 on the potential of community benefit charges, and we'll be planning forward with respect to a 2024 development charge, background study, and bylaw update. Several initiatives in the GIS plan will commence in 2022, and IT will launch the new IT Strategy 2.0 with implementation in 2023 to 2024. I'll take a few minutes to go through the corporate services organizational chart, as well as some of our financial reporting for 2022. You can see in this table is that there is a change with respect to complement in 2022. You'll see 5 additional FTEs in legal services and risk management. This was approved in year by council and this was in response to a difficult insurance market and some difficult conditions whereby the city had to amend our deductibles. Uh, in effect, we are bringing more work in-house, and that required the addition of 5 FTEs. With respect to the 2022 Corporate Services Preliminary Budget, I'll just draw your attention to the middle of this table. You'll see we are presenting for committee a recommended 2022 preliminary budget, which represents an increase of about $700,000 or 1.9%. Over and above the maintenance budget are a series of council referred items and business cases that will be presented at a future GIC. If all of those investments as it relates to the council referred items and business cases were to be approved, the corporate services preliminary 2022 budget would represent an increase of approximately 3.5%. You'll see that the principal driver to the corporate services 2022 budget is employee-related costs. Employee-related costs are increasing by approximately $1.7 million. There are some computer software, licensing and subscription pressures of about $87,000. Some recoveries through our capital program, approximately $21,000. Some additional fees and fine revenue. These are POA fine revenue, death registrations, marriage licenses, and tax certificates and related documents. These additional revenues represent approximately $183,000. And as it relates to reserve and cost allocations or cost recoveries, you can see that is increasing by approximately $870,000. Important to note the majority of the $870,000 or approximately $700,000 of that is tied to the 5 additional FTEs as it relates to our risk management work. Council approved the recovery of those costs through the chargebacks to internal departments and boards and agencies as it relates to risk and insurance. As well, there's some wage transfer between public works and corporate services that represents approximately $91,000 and an additional in-year approval by council of $88,000 to our election reserve in an effort to support the 2022 municipal election. With respect to looking ahead, looking forward to 2023 through 2025, you can see that corporate services are forecasting inflationary increases of approximately 3.2% in 2023, followed by 2%, 1.8% increases in the years 2024 to 2025. I'll just take a few moments to go through some of the divisional, organizational, and financial information. You can see as it relates to the city clerk's office, organizationally, no change. In 2022, with respect to the preliminary budget for the clerk's office, you can see staff are reporting a preliminary budget, which represents an increase of approximately $173,000 or 5.8%. Important to note that the driving factors to this is the $88,000 contribution to reserve and to ensure that we have a sustainable reserve to support the municipal election, including the upcoming 2022 municipal election. Approximately $57,000 employee-related costs, as well as additional $31,000 in facility charges. And finally, offsetting those pressures is approximately $46,000 in additional revenues tied to death registrations and marriage licenses. And this slide provides a series of metrics that I'll leave with committee, just identifying some of the trends over the last number of years as it relates to the services that clerk's office supports. Moving on to customer service, POA, and financial integration. You can see no change to the organizational structure in 2022. With respect to the 2022 preliminary budget, an increase of approximately $135,000 or 2.3%. Driving this preliminary budget are employee-related costs, approximately $231,000 in pressures, some internal cost pressures, approximately $61,000, and offsetting these pressures is approximately $84,000, which is tied to red light camera recoveries and the call center recoveries as it relates to support that we provide to Hamilton Water. And finally, some additional POA fine revenue of approximately $75,000. And I will leave with committee a series of metrics as relates to customer service, POA, and financial integration for the period 2018 to 2021. Moving on to financial planning, administration, and policy. Again, no change to the organizational structure recommended for 2022. As it relates to the 2022 preliminary budget, an increase of approximately $150,000 or 2.9%, principally being driven by employee-related costs, with some additional recoveries from other departments, as well as a internal recovery, approximately $111,000, and finally a recovery through our capital projects of approximately $21,000. And again, a series of metrics that I'll leave with committee as it relates to this division for the period 2017 through 2020 as it relates to our investment strategy, and then for the period 2018 to 2021 as it relates to assessment and property taxes and credit rating. Moving on to financial services, taxation, and corporate controller division. You can see no changes to the organizational structure for 2022. With respect to the preliminary budget, staff are proposing an increase just short of $200,000 or 4.9%. The driving factor to the increase is employee-related costs, with some additional tax certificate and ownership information fee revenue of approximately $40,000. And again, some metrics as it relates to our pre-authorized payment plan and our tax arrears for the period 2017 to 2020. Moving on to IT. Again, no changes to the proposed organizational structure for 2022. As it relates to the 2022 preliminary budget, staff are proposing an increase of approximately $114,000 or 0.7%. Pressures represent employee-related costs and some computer software licensing subscription, and offsetting that are some internal recoveries from city departments of just short of $90,000. And some additional metrics as it relates to IT services for the period 2018 to 2021 that I'll leave with committee. Legal services and risk management, as I mentioned previously, in 2021, staff approved an additional complement of 5 FTEs, and this was in response to a challenging insurance market that all municipalities are facing. With respect to the preliminary 2022 budget, you can see that staff are presenting a slight decrease in legal services and risk management of approximately $69,000 or 1.7%. What the division is facing are pressures as it relates to additional FTEs, offsetting the employee-related cost pressure as it relates to those 5 FTEs. Are some additional cost recoveries from departments and boards and agencies as it relates to insurance costs. So important to note that these costs are distributed across the organization. But while the cost is reported in legal and risk management, there is an offsetting recovery from city departments and boards and agencies. And a series of metrics as it relates to the work that legal and risk management continue to support, and these metrics are for the period 2018 to 2021. And through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all corporate services staff, all 500 plus FTEs that make up corporate services. It's again my privilege to present the corporate services 2022 preliminary budget. Apologize for all the content as relates to 2021 highlights, but I felt it was important to note all the sensational work that corporate services staff have been supporting, not only through the early days of the pandemic, but we continue to support through this stage of the pandemic. So again, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, happy to answer any questions that committee members might have.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. And you don't have to apologize for the content. It was very thorough and very easy to follow. So I congratulate you and your staff for putting this presentation together and for the most part, staying within our guidelines. So I just want to express my personal appreciation to that. I have a very short speakers list. I have one, Councillor Farr.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm just really getting maybe some clarity and more definition on what Mike called, quote, a difficult insurance market, end quote. And maybe just through you, if Mike could sum up what this city and all others, as you've mentioned, are up against, its effect on our resources, et cetera. So maybe just sum that up, the origins of this difficult situation, as you call it.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do appreciate the question, as committee will likely see reference to insurance pressures as it relates to city departments, and you would have heard through the Hamilton Police Services budget late last week. Insurance is one of those themes that are driving the preliminary 2022 budget for that external board. The insurance market is challenging not only for the city of Hamilton, but it's challenging for all municipalities for a series of factors. One is the number of firms who are willing to provide insurance to municipalities is limited. And so as it relates to supply and demand, the demand is still there as it relates to municipalities, but with limited supply, that is driving the cost of insurance for all municipalities, including the city of Hamilton. Some of the factors that may be contributing to that are what the insurance company may be facing or are facing, not may be facing. Climate change is a real risk to insurance companies. And so as climate change impacts as relates to our natural environment and our infrastructure and assets, that is a risk that insurance companies evaluate and consider as it relates to which markets they are wanting to participate in addition to factors such as climate change or some of the associated impacts on infrastructure, including the consequences of flooding on infrastructure, is other risks to municipalities. We're seeing challenges as it relates to insurance tied to IT, and as we all see on a regular basis, some of the efforts by those individuals as it relates to hacking into networks and trying to access networks represents a risk, and that's a risk to all organizations, including municipalities. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there are a series of factors. The supply of firms is a factor, but as well as what's transpiring around us as it relates to climate change and some additional risk to municipalities is reflected in higher premiums. And again, we are working with our with city departments to try to positively affect the potential claims against the city. And as I mentioned, through the leadership of our city solicitor, Stephen Sprackman, we will be presenting in 2022 a risk management strategy for the corporation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And certainly HPS was referenced, but through you, are there other boards and agencies, sort of this insurance dilemma trickle down effect that are also affected by this issue? Are there other boards and agencies, and how are you helping?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll start, and then maybe if Stephen wants to expand on the support that risk management provides. So as it relates to city departments, boards, and maybe I'll start with the latter question around how risk management supports city departments, boards, and agencies. We do provide information, and we try to provide strategies as it relates to managing risks, claims against city departments and boards and agencies. Excuse me. And those meetings happen on a regular basis between risk management staff and internal departments and external boards and agencies. And by external boards and agencies, I'm principally speaking to Hamilton Police Services and Hamilton Library Services. And that information is shared in an effort to reduce the number of risks against city departments and boards and agencies. Important to note that insurance and risk management is a distributed cost. We spread those costs across departments and boards and agencies. And so to the councillor's question with respect to which boards and agencies, it would principally be Hamilton Police Services and Hamilton Public Library that would be reporting pressures in 2022 as it relates to insurance. And I'm not sure if Stephen just wants to add any content as it relates to the role of risk management.
Solicitor Sprackland, you want to check in?
Certainly, through you, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, to Councillor Farr, in response to your question with regards to risk management. I see, and Mike, I think, did a very good job of summarizing where we are from an insurance industry perspective. There's been consolidation with regards to those willing to provide us with coverage. In addition, there's also been changes in risk profile. And as municipalities, we have seen changes in risk profile associated with municipalities that have transit responsibility, with municipalities that have responsibility for EMS and police services. And I think there's a general increase in the litigious nature of where we are as a society, and that creates additional pressures on us as an organization. And as a result, we see the risk industry and the insurance industry responding with increasing premiums and also increasing deductibles by way of self-insurance to protect themselves from escalating claims and escalating claim value. Part of the process is about risk profiling, and for the insurance industry to identify the risks that are presented by any individual that's applying for insurance, and then apply the right metrics to give them the coverage that meets the model for protection and alignment with regards to premium recovery. In situations that we are encountering difficulty in, as Mike has mentioned, we see an investment that the city has made over time has resulted in a risk profile that insurers are viewing as being more or less aggressive, and as a result they are taking a different view, and that's the tightening of the marketplace that we're seeing. So I think what we're seeing is an industry restriction in accordance with responses to how municipalities have been exposed to risk and how they manage it. With regards to our response to risk management, we're looking to introduce an enterprise risk management framework this year that will help us identify, categorize, and mitigate risk to the greatest extent possible to help us to manage the risk profile, to therefore present less risk to the insurance industry and hopefully get us a better model with regards to coverage and premium going forward.
Councillor Farr?
Terrific answers by both Mike and Stephen. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, we're hearing these companies have consolidated. I guess there's limited supply, limited insurance companies tackling this and other municipality policies. There's changes locally, as Stefan has mentioned, in risk profile. We live in a more litigious world. I'm sure that also is not exclusive to Hamilton. The one thing I'd like to dig into a little further, but not here today, is, one of the reasons we're hearing, and we heard from Mike, that insurance companies are jacking up premiums is our natural environment and climate change as one of their reasons, and fair enough. But what I'd like to see is up until this point, how much of things like the escarpment falling down or other natural issues that can clearly be associated to climate change, how much of that was covered with our previous policies? I'd like to know, since they're using that as a means to jack things up in this and every other municipality. That's not for today. I really appreciate the responses and the opportunity. Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Farr. And I could tell you yesterday at the Roma conference, the cabinet was taking a grilling from a number of municipalities because 2 years ago they were requested to reform the insurance and side of things as it relates to municipalities, particularly around if you're 1% at fault, you're eligible for to pay 100% of the cost. And so they got that message yesterday to try to move forward with that. So I'll move on to the next speaker, and that's Councillor Jackson.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor Ferguson. Thank you very much. Thanks, GM Zagaric, for your sixth divisional departmental presentation. Just a few questions further for my edification, if I could please, Mike. Mike, on slide 8 and on slide 14, you referred to on a bullet point, enhanced virtual early resolution service delivery and virtual trial service delivery. And on the same slide 14, tying in, you talk about virtual trials enhancements. General Manager Zagaric, the question I'm asking is, I know we've been in a digital world for years now, but this pandemic has caused us to do more virtual, hoping, praying beyond what we're currently in, that someday, and I believe the community overall is yearning. We've seen that with a lot of the advocacy campaigns, yearning for in-person contact and in-person meetings again. The thrust of my question to you, General Manager Zagaric, is in talking about enhanced virtual services. If we hopefully come out of the pandemic, when we do, will you be seeing a maintaining of virtual services at the level it is? Will you see a reduction that could help budget pressures in the future? Hopefully, you get a thrust of the question I'm asking you. Through you, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, please.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do appreciate the question because it does raise some of the same questions that we've had as it relates to more specifically provincial offenses and what municipalities under the direction of the Ministry of Attorney General are being asked to support. And I'll start, and then I'm going to invite Director McCanty and Solicitor Sprackland to speak to it because it has been quite a journey in 2021 and it might have started in 2020 as it relates to pivoting to virtual support for the POA courts. And so I want to first start by thanking POA staff, but beyond POA staff, legal staff and IT staff, because again, there were expectations from Ministry Attorney General that we had to satisfy as it relates to this body of work. And I want to thank those three divisions and the staff within those three divisions on executing on that. And again, I think City of Hamilton and Cindy may confirm this. It was a leader as it relates to how we executed and how effectively we executed on that work. So I'll ask Cindy and Stephen if maybe they can provide some additional detail as it relates to the requirements, how we executed on those requirements, and more specifically to the councillor's question, how will this work continue to evolve as it relates to virtual hearings, and will that be permanent on a go-forward basis?
You've captured my question perfectly, General Manager. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you so much, Councillor, for the question. Similar to Mike, I do want to recognize the outstanding work of not only POA admin, but also POA legal and our stakeholders. If it was not for everyone's support, POA would not be in the position that it is today with regards to our ability to offer virtual trials. It's important to note that virtual trials will continue as we move forward, and we are doing not only virtual resolutions that have been enhanced, but also virtual trials. But please note the ministry has also provided direction that in-person trials will also be reintroduced into the court master plan as we migrate our way out of the pandemic. So that's an important sort of component to mention. Virtual trials will now be part of our court master plan. We have noticed some advantages with going virtual, although there has been some pressures. There also has been some advantages in going in virtual. But I will say the feedback that we've been receiving, not only from our stakeholders, but from individuals who have gone through the process, it is accessible. They are able to sort of navigate through the process, and it has allowed us to continue not only to offer the services of virtual resolution, but also continue with the trial process. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, it does, Director McKenty. Sounds like your prediction is it'll be a hybrid probably going into the future, even as we hopefully end the pandemic once and for all eventually, that it sounds like virtual is here to stay to some degree, some level of service. And I was just trying to tie that in with overall budget pressures moving forward. I didn't know if City Solicitor Sprackland had anything to add. If not, then that's fine for that question.
I have nothing further to add, Councillor.
Okay.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, simply to add on to Councillor Jackson is absolutely correct in his description on the service delivery model going forward. It will be a hybrid. And as a result, you'll see a business case where staff have identified the need of some additional staff to support that hybrid model to be offset by some of the fines and fees as it relates to provincial offenses. But again, important to note that this will impact the required resources to deliver on that hybrid model.
Thank you, General Manager. Two quick further questions, Deputy Mayor Ferguson. On slide 18, just to be clear on your overall budget requests of your divisions, Mike, you're sitting at 1.9. Thank you very much. Wonderful. But you have about a half a dozen business cases that you're bringing forward. So if council were to approve all of them at the end of the day, you're sitting at 3.5. If we approved a portion of them, it'd be somewhere between 1.9 and 3.5. If we approve none of them, we're sitting at 1.9, correct?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, correct, and I won't expand on it because Councillor Jackson described it so well.
And lastly, as you know, Mike, we still, part of our job, we get claims filed through our offices to risk management from time to time. So you set up a process a few months ago in light of some changes in the risk management division, just making sure process-wise. Is my office still filing claims on behalf of constituents through the city solicitor and or acting manager Diana Swaby, or is a different process now in place? Through you, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, please, just so that I'm clear.
Yep. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll invite Stephen to speak to how elected officials can advance information.
Yes.
I'm fairly confident you're not filing claims, but
No.
how you're advancing information to
Better
risk management
better use
staff.
of words, General Manager. That's what I meant to say. Advancing it on behalf of constituents who file them through sometimes our offices.
Yes.
Correct.
Thank you.
Through Deputy Mayor Ferguson to Councillor Jackson. Yes, Councillor Jackson, the process remains the same. Any member of council can forward a constituent concern with regards to a potential claim to either myself or Diana Swabe, who's the acting manager of risk management. We're in the process of recruiting to facilitate the backfill for those positions and roles that were made vacant last year. And when those staffing decisions have been made and finalized, we'll communicate that to you and we'll put a new process in place to make sure that your requests are addressed in a timely fashion.
Thank you, City Solicitor. Deputy Mayor Ferguson, that's the extra information I need for now. Thank you.
Great questions, Councillor. Move on now to Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a singular question. I notice in the proposal there's an enhancement of 5 FTEs. Could I get an explanation as to not only the need, but what the additional responsibilities will be for those individuals?
Mike, I think it's risk, isn't it?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it is. So for the benefit of Councillor Powers and the community, is in 2021, staff brought forward a report that spoke to the challenges of the risk or of the insurance market. And we presented a series of scenarios and business cases to committee for consideration. One of the recommended scenarios was to increase our deductible in an effort to try to contain the our insurance cost pressures for 2021 and 2022. But what that represented was bringing in-house some additional work around risk management and additional work as it relates to legal prosecution. And the 5 FTE supports that work. I'll allow Stephen, or not allow, I'll invite Stephen to speak in some additional detail as it relates to those pressures. But again, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it was principally the change in our deductibles, whereby we're increasing the deductibles. That translates into additional work for city staff that staff felt the need to put forward an additional 5 FTEs.
Stephen?
Through Deputy Mayor Ferguson to Councillor Powers, Mr. Gazaric has done a good job of summarizing the issues. With the increase in deductible to keep our premium at a more manageable level, we are taking on a number of claims. And so we see a significant number of claims on an annual basis. An increase in the self-insurance portion, which is our deductible, means that we will have to manage those independent of the insurer stepping in. And we believe that there are a significant number of claims that will now be the responsibility of the city to manage. And instead of having to exercise and utilize external counsel to support those litigation efforts, we have increased staff not only within risk management, but within legal services to provide litigation support to hopefully mitigate the costs associated with defending those claims that are now our responsibility and that are associated with the increased deductible.
For the
Councillor
answer. Just for you, Councillor Ferguson, the issue you raised about insurance, joint and several liability, it was an issue that the province made a promise to me 10 years ago when I was AMO president. So, yep, they're hustling along to sort that issue out.
Well, they took a beating yesterday at Roma about it, and so I thought you'd be interested to hear that. But thanks for your efforts in the past too, Councillor Powers. Okay, Madam Clerk, I see no more speakers, and so I just need a motion to receive then.
Correct.
Councillor Pearson, Councillor Johnson, all in favor?
Councillor Wilson, thank you so much. And Councillor Marula. Thank you. That carries 15-0.
Okay, Council, we have one presentation left, Planning and Economic Development. And I saw it was some 70 slides, I think. So would you like to take a 5-minute bio break or keep on going? I see some people liking that idea. So it is now 12:07. So at or 10:07, 10:27. Sun's shining in my computer. So we'll be back then at 10:32.
Just need a
Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor?
Thank you, sir. That carries.
and hopefully we'll carry some business. And I'd like to now call on Jason Thorne. Yes, Madam. Yes, Councillor Partridge.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I neglected at the very beginning to let everyone know that I have a Food and Farm Alliance board meeting at 1 o'clock. So I will be leaving the meeting just after 12:30. Thank you.
Okay, I suspect we'll be close to being done by then. So I'd now like to call on Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development, to provide a presentation on 6.1. So Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen.
Well, you got a busy home screen.
That was not the screen I meant to share. Let me try that again.
Okay, we can see it now.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. And I'm Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. And very pleased to take you through our departmental presentation for 2021 and 2022. Before I begin, I do also want to thank my all the directors in PED and their staff for what was a considerable amount of work to pull all of this information together this morning. There is quite a bit of content here that I do want to share with Council and the public today. I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly, but I'm certainly happy to come back and answer questions about any of the specifics at the end of the presentation. And I also just want to thank our FNA staff, particularly Maya Walters, our new FNA manager, as well as Andrea Bevilacqua and Lydia Lepetadescu for their support in pulling this information together. Our first couple of slides just restate the department's mission statement, as well as the 16 service and subsurface areas that we are responsible for as a department. But I'm going to begin this morning with some of our highlights from 2021. And I'll start with an overview of some of the development activity that happened in the city over the past year. Because of course, driving growth and development in the city is one of the priority term of council priorities that has been tasked to PED. And I think you'll see a theme in the next few slides that despite COVID, development activity in Hamilton hit record levels in 2021, pretty much across every category that we track. And I'll go through some of the specifics. So this is one of the slides that I always share. This is tracking building permit construction value across the city for 2021. It's an important indicator because this reflects either actually built or under construction projects. So this represents real development activity in the city. And in 2021, as a city, for the first time, we exceeded $2 billion in construction activity, which is quite a significant accomplishment. Similar to previous years, this graph shows, or this map shows where some of those hotspots were. The downtown, as usual, shows as one of the development hotspots within the city. Waterdown as well typically shows up as one of the high concentration areas for new construction. Interestingly, in 2021, also starting to see a lot of activity down around the airport. You see a little bit of sort of a light blue coloring there, representing a lot of development activity at the airport in 2021. And it wasn't just in 2021 a record year for overall construction value, for housing units as well. 2021 was the highest year ever in terms of new housing units built in the city at 3,319 units, which is about 600 units more than what our previous record year was. So again, that's a very significant amount of growth. And something else that's notable in this slide, if you can see the green bar, in 2021. The green bar represents the number of units that were built in multi-residential or apartments. And I've been noting in previous years that this share of development has been creeping upwards. And in 2021, for the first time in recent history at least, we had more units built in apartments and multi-residential than we did singles, semis, and towns. So it was about 55% were in multis and apartments compared to, if you go back about 10 years, it was more like about 10% of the housing units. So that's significant change as well. And not just a record-setting year for residential, but if you look at our non-residential as well, 2021 was our biggest year ever. So again, growing non-residential, I know is one of the key term of council priorities that was tasked to PED. And in 2021, we had about $770 million in non-residential construction activity. Just to put that in a bit of perspective, you'll recall Norm and Carrie were in front of council a few weeks ago presenting our new Economic Development Action Plan. The stretch goal that was identified in that plan was $500 million. So in 2021, we already exceeded that first year stretch goal in hitting $700 million. And one of the big stories that's shown in this chart as well, that's a continuing story, is industrial activity. So that's the purple line that you'll see on this graph. And industrial alone was about $500 million in 2021. This is another important statistic that we track. This is gross floor area of construction just for commercial and industrial. So what we've removed from this statistic is non-tax paying institutional, and this is just gross floor area for commercial and industrial. And you'll see, again, 2021, a record-setting year at about 2.7 million square feet. So almost triple what we were seeing just a few years ago. And again, thinking of that ECDEV action plan, the stretch goal that was identified in there was 1.4 million square feet per year. So we almost doubled that in 2021. Another good sign, I think, is where this non-residential activity is happening. So this is some of the major projects from 2021. And what this shows is that we are seeing activity all over the city. So the non-residential isn't just happening in one place. We see activity in Waterdown. We see it in the Industrial Bayfront, in the Stony Creek Industrial Area, up in the Red Hill Business Park, around the AEGD. This activity, this 2.8 million square feet represents just over 3,300 jobs, either created or retained. And again, distributed around the city, which I think bodes well for the city's goal around creating a complete community and having access to jobs for people all over the city. So if you pull all that together, it paints a pretty good picture for 2021 in terms of development activity. A record year for total construction value, a record year for the number of housing units built, a record year for the amount of industrial construction, and a record year for the amount of commercial and industrial gross floor area that was built. All of that, of course, means PED was once again quite busy in terms of application volumes. I'll start with building permits. Council may recall that in 2020, I had noted we had a slight drop in building permit application activity, not a big drop, but about a 5% drop off. In 2021, we were rebounded back up to where we were pre-COVID levels. And what I want to note on this slide is really the dark blue part of the chart, because in 2019, we made a continuous improvement change where we actually combined our building permits with our water and sewer connection permits. So that's what the hatch mark is. So those were about 1,500 or so, maybe 2,000 of the permits we saw each year. So if you just compare actual building permits, which is the solid blue line, then in 2021, it was actually our second highest year ever for building permits. Similar story here with development applications. So this is all types of planning applications. As I had reported last year, 2020, we had seen a fairly big drop off in terms of planning applications. 2021, we've rebounded right back up to pre-COVID levels, and again, had our second highest year ever in terms of planning applications. I thought it was important to share this slide as well. This is not one that I've shared every year, but this is the balance in our development fee stabilization reserve. So council will know this was created a number of years ago, where any of the fees that come in for planning applications, development applications, that are not utilized in year go into this reserve, because most of those fees are paid upfront, and some of the work can take a year or two to process the applications. So I had, when I had presented my first budget, which is right back in about 2014, 2015, this was an area of concern. The balance was getting low and declining. The goal here is to have about 18 months of our operating costs covered. That would be about 15 million. So we aren't there quite yet. But what you see here with all of the development activity we've been seeing in the city, with the updated fees that were introduced in 2020, lots of hard work by city staff, the development fee stabilization reserve being in a much more healthy balance than where it was just a few years ago. I'll turn now to some of the highlights from the department's efforts in 2021 to support some of our other areas of economic development and some of our other economic sectors. 2021, of course, kicked off with the report of the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery, and that drove a number of actions and initiatives over the course of the year. We also had a major milestone in terms of having council approval of our updated Economic Development Action Plan that outlines about 77 actions that will guide a lot of our ECDEV work in the coming year. So that plan was brought forward by the ECDEV division, as well as tourism and culture. And we also launched a new strategic plan for our Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, which is really focused on our goal of ensuring we have successful settlement experiences for newcomers to our city, and also increasing the number of newcomers that we are welcoming to our city each year. We all know that small business is one of the most heavily impacted sectors over the past 2 years. So we did continue a number of our small business support programs in 2021. The activity at our Hamilton Business Center, so that's what we used to call our one-stop, was up again in 2021. About 195 new business startups supported through that center. Our starter company and summer company as well issued 52 grants to individuals starting up summer businesses. And then we continued some of the new programming that we had put in place for COVID as well. So that includes the COVID Concierge for Business that was established in partnership with our Chambers of Commerce. That's had about 16,000 unique users, since it was first launched. So it's been quite popular. 133 digital transformation grants to help some of our small businesses get online. We're now up over 1,300 businesses on our hometown hub, which helps our local businesses offer some online gift cards and services and that sort of thing. And we had just over 200 businesses take part in our temporary patio program. The Tourism and Culture Division also continued sector support for the arts and culture sectors with programs like our online musician conference. Council approved a fair payment of musicians policy for musicians working at city-led events. We brought forward our new civic museum strategy and launched a couple of new important public art and gateway projects, including the two that are shown on the slide here at Mount Hope and Stony Creek. The strength of the film sector is, again, one of the good news stories of the year and continues to be a good news story for the city of Hamilton. What you're seeing here is both the number of permits, which is the blue line, as well as the number of productions, which is the red line, are up in 2021 and really are right back up to our pre-COVID levels. And the really big story with this one, and it's not shown in the chart, but direct spend from film hit a record in 2021 at $69 million in direct spend for the year. So that's actually about 15% higher than even our pre-COVID levels in terms of film activity in the city. So the trend we've been seeing in film is continuing, and it's a really positive trend that we're seeing bigger productions with bigger direct spend per production. We're seeing more multi-day shoots, which means it's generating more hotel stays. Our film support industries are doing quite well, and many of them tell us that that success is tied to the amount of production happening in the city. And then, of course, we're seeing some bricks and mortar investments. Most notably last year was the 80,000 square foot facility by Aeon Studios on Queen Street North. But we also have Hamilton Film Studios, Skylight, Evil Empire, Cotton Factory, Digital Canary, all bricks and mortar film activity in the city. The tourism and hospitality sector, again, one of our hardest hit sectors through COVID. Our tourism team normally supports an industry that welcomes about 4.5 million visitors to our city every year, spending about $360 million. So this has been a hard hit sector. There was some good news in 2021. We, of course, had one of our big major events, the 2021 Grey Cup, the relocation of the Rock to the city, the launch of the Hamilton 175 virtual celebrations, and also using our tourism social media channels and other marketing outreach to support local business and to encourage local discovery and getting people out into some of our local commercial areas. But this statistic obviously still a concern. In terms of hotel stays across the city, there was a rebound in 2021 over 2020, but still not quite back to our pre-COVID levels. And there's an important caveat for this slide as well, that those 2021 numbers reflect what our hotel partners tell us was really their best December ever. And that was thanks largely to the Grey Cup, which generated a number of hotel stays. So had it not been for that, we would not have seen quite the rebound in 2021 that we did see. Another good news story tied to this is that film industry that I spoke about earlier. That's generating a fair number of hotel stays. So an improvement in 2021, but certainly not back to where we were pre-COVID. Similarly, museum visitation still way down in 2021. This is because a number of our facilities were closed the entire year or most of the year, And even the museums that were open at fairly significantly reduced capacities, which meant that our visitation continues to be significantly down. In addition to our development approvals work and our work to support small business and sector development, all of that which goes into economic development in the city, PED is also responsible for a number of major growth-related infrastructure projects tied to new development. This is not a complete list, obviously, but this is some of the highlights from 2021. We had the extension of Clapison Drive and the Borers Creek Crossing up in Waterdown, as well as the construction of Levitt Boulevard. Added about another half kilometer to North Waterdown Drive, is under construction out to Center Road. Completion of the first phase of Osprey Drive west of Shaver, and the construction of Rachel Drive in Stony Creek. And then, of course, PED played a significant role in the LRT project with the signing of the MOU with Metrolinx in 2021. Also a big year for investment in cycling infrastructure in 2021, just under $4 million in projects completed with our partners in Public Works. This again, one of our term of council priorities around achieving a multimodal transportation system, also a key one of PED's actions under the Climate Action Plan to increase cycling in the city. So this is a graphic that we've been developing. This is meant to be a conceptual illustration of the city's planned core cycling network. So the intent here is not to try to show every bike lane in the city. We're really just trying to give an indication of the network connectivity and its coverage of that core cycling network. And this is also the network we're working towards. So not all of these links are actually constructed yet, but this is sort of our vision for the cycling network. These are some of the projects that were delivered in 2021. 14 different projects in total, representing 21 kilometers of new and upgraded cycling infrastructure. So it includes the new multi-use path on Strawn, the additional physical protections on York and Cannon, the parking protected lane on Hatt, new bike lanes on Creighton, the parking protected corridor through Hunter, and the new bi-directional lanes on Victoria. In parking, we had a major milestone in 2021 with the completion of the Parking Master Plan, which is a major undertaking of the Transportation Planning and Parking Division. There's actually a bit of an error on this slide. My apologies. There's actually 34, not 134, new EV charging stations installed in the city. I don't know if Brian's watching. We'll shoot for 134 in 2022. I don't know if we'll pull that off. But sorry about that. That's a typo on that bullet. Our new payment technologies are doing really well. Credit cards on about 40% of all of our revenues, and the Pay by Phone app is expected to reach about $500,000 in transactions. I also just want to draw attention to the work of our maintenance staff in the parking system, and some of the work they do. This is just sort of one indicator of how much they've done in 2021 with the removal of 42,000 kilograms of waste from our parking lots across the city. PD also works with our public works partners to deliver some critical infrastructure related to water and sewer works to support growth. In 2021, the upgrades were completed at the Waterdown South pumping station, at the 3 new pumping stations to support growth in the AEGD. The detailed design work for that Dickinson Road trunk sanitary sewer, which is a major piece of infrastructure necessary to bring on the full development capacity at the airport. And Hamilton Water completed the main pumping station upgrade at Woodward Avenue that supports some of the development in Lower Stony Creek. And then we also, through our real estate section and our municipal development office, are responsible for delivering a number of major development projects. West Harbour obviously is one of the key ones. 2021, big milestone in signing the development agreement with Waterfront Shores that paves the way for that development to proceed. Completion of the works at Pier 8, the Cops Pier Park, which fingers crossed will be opening to the public very soon, and substantial completion of the works for the new boardwalk and public space at Pier 6 and 7. And then we also, of course, had the master development agreement signed with the Hupreg Group for our entertainment district. This chart shows just how busy that real estate team has been. 2021, we had a record year hitting almost $100 million in transactions. That's that red line delivered through our real estate section. So my last 2 slides for the 2021 highlights are related to bylaw enforcement. As council knows, this has been one of the most impacted areas within PED, at least, in terms of workloads as a result of COVID. This chart shows the number of calls attended by bylaw officers in the year, which has remained relatively constant, both in animal services and municipal law enforcement. which is really fairly remarkable given the amount of calls and workload they've been taken on through COVID as well, in addition to this normal day-to-day activity. And in parking as well, over 26,000 calls for service, a lot of activity around the waterfalls, 99,000 parking penalties issued, over 14,000 requests for screening. And this map shows where the concentration activity around the city related to parking enforcement. So I'll turn now to some of our key performance indicators. We track a number of KPIs across the department in a number of our different service areas. I'm going to focus in on some of the ones tied to development approvals because I know that is one of the key, again, term of council priorities that was set for PED. And in the next couple of slides, I think what you'll see is a mostly positive story about being able to maintain our approval timelines for the most part, notwithstanding COVID and notwithstanding the much higher volumes of development applications that were coming in 2021. So this represents the timelines for getting a planning application from when it's deemed complete in front of planning committee for a decision. So in red is zoning bylaw amendments, and in blue is official plan amendments. Our goal for these is to get OPs in front of planning committee within 1 year, 65% of OPs in front of planning committee within 1 year, 90% of our routine rezonings in front of committee within a year, and 65% of our complex rezonings in front of committee within 1 year. So this is one where we did see a big increase in 2020 through COVID. We've brought that down a little bit in 2021, but is still a little bit above where our targets are. So we are looking to bring that one down further in 2022. What continues to kind of complicate this particular metric is some of the older, what we call our legacy files that come forward. So again, in 2021, we had 5 files that were over 3 years old that had sat dormant for a period of time. And came forward finally in 2021. So if you extract those kinds of older legacy files, then typical new applications coming in are actually hitting our targets. This is a similar KPI. This is for draft plans and how long it takes draft plans to get to planning committee. This is one that we saw a significant increase in 2020, that we focused a lot on bringing down those timelines in 2021, and we're back down to our pre-COVID levels. And still staying down from where we were back in 2015, 2016. Council may recall that was one of the areas of concern that the Open for Business initiative first zeroed in on, and where we had council make some investments in terms of additional staff. It was the first process we took through our Lean Six Sigma continuous improvement exercise, brought those timelines down from around 900 days to just over a year. And last year, again, a bit of an uptick, but back to our pre-COVID levels for 2021. We also do KPIs for some of the individual approval steps within the overall timeline. So this is one example. This is the number of days it takes to complete a zoning review for one of our planning files. So every planning application has to have a zoning review completed for it. This, again, was an area that I had noted with council was an area of concern back in 2017, 2018. Council approved 3 additional staff in this area, and the benefits of that we continue to see today, being able to maintain those timelines. In blue is zoning reviews for site plans, and in red for zoning amendments. This one reflects our review times for engineering submissions. On the left is engineering submissions for subdivisions, and on the right is engineering submissions for site plans. And here we track both the time taken by the city, which is in blue, so the time the application's in our hands, as well as the time taken by the applicant in red, because this is a bit more of an iterative process. So in subdivisions, we had been relatively constant over the past 3 or 4 years. During COVID, we had a bit of an increase, which last year was about 3 months above our pre-COVID levels, and saw a similar increase in the review times on the applicant side. On the site plans for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been sitting around the 100-day mark for the amount of time that these applications are in our hands, and we've generally been able to maintain that. This KPI reflects minor variances. So we track the number of days it takes us to get a minor variance or a consent application to committee of adjustment for a decision. Our goal here is 45 days. And you'll see in 2021, we were able to maintain those timelines. I did report last year in 2020, because we had the committee of adjustment shut down for a period of time, we had an increase there. So what the solid line represents in 2020 is the timeline after the committee of adjustment started meeting again. And so in 2020, when the Committee of Adjustment was meeting, we were able to meet that 45-day timeline and maintain that in 2021. Turn now to building permits. COVID has had a fairly negligible impact in terms of our approval timelines for building permits. In the chart on the left, you'll see in blue the number of days it takes us to review a 10-day permit, and in red, a 20-day permit, and we're within our timelines on both of those. And on the right, we're showing the overall number of permits issued within 5 days of the statutory timeline. And our goal here is that red line of 90%, and we've been able to stay above that through 2021. Business licenses, this was another area that back in 2014, Council had made some investments to try to bring these timelines down. Back then, we were a little over 60 days to review a business license. Since then, we've been able to stay within the 30 to 40-day range. We have been up a little bit in 2021. You'll see that average review times are sitting at 48 days for 2021. That's a reflection of the fact that our counter has been closed, has been open just the 1 day a week through most of COVID. But generally still staying pretty close to that 30, 40-day mark for our review timelines. And finally, transportation planning. This one's a bit of a different metric. What we're showing here is in blue is the number of reviews we've completed, and in red is the number of applications coming in. So the idea here is that the blue and the red, we want to be in balance, which means the number of applications coming in is the same as the number of reviews going out. Again, this was an area that I noted some concern back in 2019. Council did approve some new investments of some new staff in this area, and very good news in 2021, we were actually able to bring those in balance and actually reduce some of the backlog in terms of our transportation planning reviews. So talk a little bit about some of the highlights of our work plan for 2022. In terms of development application forecasts, we're forecasting for 2022, 2023, maintaining relatively constant application levels from what we had in 2021, sitting around that 1,000, 1,100 applications coming in the door. This is sort of just based on historical trends, where we may start to see as we get into 2024, 2025, especially as we shift more of our growth towards intensification. I expect the draft plan of subdivision activity to decrease, probably some of the site plan activity to increase. Also, as we update our secondary plans and our zoning, the hope is we'll actually see fewer applications for OPAs and rezonings as we get into sort of that 2023, 2024 range. But for the next 2 years, we're forecasting relatively constant activity levels. Not a lot of surprise here in terms of where we see the residential development happening over the next couple of years. Continue to see activity in the Waterdown area, Stony Creek waterfront. As we get into the 2024, 2025, start to see some of activity in the Fruitland-Winona area and West Harbour. And then downtown Hamilton LRT corridor has been a hotspot for a number of years. We expect to continue to see that, as well as in Ancaster, West Mountain, Upper Stony Creek, and Binbrook. Employment as well. We continue to expect to see fairly good distributed employment growth around the city. This map is from the shovel-ready employment lands inventory report that was in front of council back in December. And you'll see what our anticipated shovel-ready employment land supply is in each of those business parks over the next 2 to 3 years. If you look at anticipated construction activity in 2022, based on what we already kind of see in the pipeline for this coming year, we're already at about 2.7 million square feet in the pipeline, which suggests to me that probably, fingers crossed, 2022 could be another, at least maintaining our record-setting year of 2021, or possibly even going beyond it, where we see a lot of activity happening, lots of activity expected in the Red Hill Business Park. We've got about 1.2 million square feet there. If you look at Continental Tire, a couple of others that are not yet announced, but we're looking at about 1.2 million square feet there. 500,000 square feet in Stony Creek. That includes a major expansion of one of the existing companies down there, as well as a couple of large spec builds that should be coming on stream in 2022. And then again, significant activity in Waterdown and in the AEGD area. So 2022 from a non-residential construction activity looks like it will be another good year. I won't go through all the details on some of the infrastructure developments that we expect to deliver over the next year or two. but I'm happy to answer questions about these later. But we have a lot of activity that either being led by PED or PW in the Waterdown area, around the AEGD in Upper Stony Creek and Lower Stony Creek as well. With respect to the LRT, expect that to be a fairly active initiative in 2022. Our current priority right now is we are finalizing the schedules to the MOU. So council may recall back in the fall when the MOU was signed, there was about 10 or 12 different schedules that fall underneath that. So the staffing agreement, the funding agreement, the governance protocol, permitting protocol, a few others. That's been our focus for the past month or two, and will continue to be for the first couple of months of 2022 as we finalize those. Metrolinx is looking to launch their procurement in around late April, early May, with a request for qualifications that they'll take out to market. Typically, that would be in market for about 3 or 4 months. That'll result in a short list of bidders, which would then be offered the opportunity to bid on the RFP, which Metrolinx is hoping will be out in around August, September. With a 6 to 8 month in-market period, the goal would be to have a preferred proponent on board by Q1 of 2023. That will be followed by a design development process. That's about an 8 to 12 month process, which means major construction estimated to begin in early 2024. Concurrently with all that, though, as Metrolinx explained when they were in front of council a few months ago, they're looking to phase some of the construction and do a fair bit of early works and early construction works. So those we expect to begin in late 2022. It includes things like some of the utility relocations and corridor preparations for the project. So that should begin in late 2022. And Metrolinx has indicated they'll be resuming some of the property acquisitions this year as well. Again, looking at some of the cycling investments, we're looking at one of our highest years ever in terms of new cycling investments in the city at about $6 million. This is just some of the examples of projects that PED and Public Works will be working on in 2022. These were reported to council back in December in an information report. It'll be a significant year as well for some of the planning initiatives. We, of course, have the implementation of Grids 2, so council approved just last week, going out for public consultation on the official plan amendments and some of the rezoning amendments that are needed to support the no urban boundary expansion growth strategy. We're looking to hopefully get out for consultation on our comprehensive residential zoning bylaw update, bring forward to council a number of fairly key policy initiatives that are closely tied to our to the climate change action plan. So new design guidelines for site plan, which will include a Hamilton Green Standard, the urban forest strategy, and the community energy and emissions plan. And in transportation planning as well, 2 major policy documents coming before council this year, the Complete Streets Guidelines and the Truck Route Master Plan. On West Harbour, we expect to see the launch of marketing and pre-sales for the Pier 8 development starting very soon. The opening of Cops Pier Park, the opening of the new public space and boardwalk at Pier 6 and 7, and starting construction on the Gateway Park at Pier 7. The Barton Tiffany lands, Aeon Film Studios will be undertaking their consultation through the first few weeks of 2022 when we're back in front of council for a decision on the potential disposition of those lands, and working with the Hugh Pay Group who on the transition of the operating and capital obligations for the city's entertainment assets in 2022. And then finally, a couple of the 2022 work plan highlights related to culture and economic development. Our ECDev team will be leading a number of sector strategies to support advanced manufacturing, FDI, and a new theme for the division around workforce and talent attraction, which is one of the key themes that came out of the ECDev action plan. Number of initiatives planned as well to support our local businesses and to support recovery in our local commercial areas. ECDev will be leading a commercial retail study. We have 6 Main Street ambassadors that will be working in our commercial areas and BIAs through 2022. And then last week, council approved a $750,000 investment in placemaking and animation in our commercial areas to support economic recovery. In tourism, we'll have a new tourism strategy in front of council, bringing forward a report on the implementation of accommodation tax. And good news, a couple of major events hopefully planned for 2022. So first one coming up this weekend, the FIFA World Cup, We've got the NHL Heritage Classic in March, the World Synchronized Skating Championships in April, and then planning work for another couple of big ones in 2023. We've got the Grey Cup coming back, the Country Music Awards, and the 2024 RBC Canadian Open. So hopefully lots of good news on the horizon from a tourism standpoint. Going to end with just a couple slides on some of the trends that we're keeping an eye on that'll potentially have a big impact on the work of our department. Of course, post-COVID economic recovery, still a bit of a question mark in terms of how some of these trends will play out. The recovery of the businesses, especially in that retail, hospitality, creative sector, how the office market is going to respond to the increase in telework, the consumer confidence in travel, which will have a big impact on our tourism sector, and the changes in mobility patterns we're seeing across the city, and some potential policy changes as well. So the changing role of conservation authorities that the province has initiated could result in some downloading of workload pressures onto city staff. The Ministry of Environment has put out a new consolidated linear infrastructure environmental compliance approvals process, which is a bit of a mouthful, but could result in some workload pressures on the staff as well. As we start to refocus city growth towards intensification, there'll be some policy work for us to do, reviewing and updating our zoning bylaws, our OP, our secondary plans. And the province has been talking a fair bit over the past few weeks about increasing housing supply, reducing approval timelines. We don't quite know what that's going to look like yet. Some of the things being talked about are around limiting the scope of site plans, for example. So all of those kinds of things could have an impact on us as a department. And I also just finally want to flag some of the staffing and resourcing challenges that we have in the department. Of course, workload continues to be a pressure area for us, really across the department. And I spoke about that earlier. It was one of the main themes that came out of our employee survey when we last did that. And really what we're seeing right now in terms of staffing challenges, we continue to have some pending retirements. Hopefully the redeployment pressures will start to reduce in the coming months. But a lot of our focus right now is around recruitment and retention. So we'll be doing some work in the coming year in the department around trying to make sure that we can retain the great staff that we already have, and also make sure that we're an employer of choice when it comes to recruiting to fill some of the vacant positions that we have. As I said, this is really across the department, but of note, some of the key pressure areas remain heritage planning, as we have a lot of public expectation and demand in terms of designating heritage buildings, issuing heritage permits, some of the heritage policy work that we do. So that's a pressure area. I spoke earlier about film. In bylaw enforcement, we have a number of new bylaws coming on stream with rental housing licensing. For example, we'll be bringing a report forward on short-term rentals in 2022. So a lot of pressure in bylaw, and then of course, development review as well. So that brings me to the 2022 operating budget. The only major changes to our org chart in 2022 is we do have an addition of, as you'll see there, 13.42 FTEs. This relates to some in-year FTE increases that were approved by council. So the first of those is the transfer of the farmers market, came out of the city manager's office into PED. So that represents 4.42 FTE. There were 3 FTEs in bylaw and 3 in planning that were approved by council as part of the rental housing licensing pilot project. So that's 6 of the FTE. And then council may recall I was in front of you in August with respect to some organizational changes in our development approvals area. And that included adding 3 FTE in the growth management division. So that comprises the 13.42 that you see on the slide there. In terms of our departmental budget, overall, we're coming in at 1.9%. That represents about a $590,000 budget increase over last year. And I'll go through some of the highlights by division in a moment. Our main budget drivers are really similar to previous years. Our biggest driver is always employer-related costs, just over $1.7 million. That alone would have had us at 5.7% for 2022. In addition, we had some of those same pressures that Mike spoke about a little bit earlier around insurance, some of our contractual services, particularly as it relates to parking enforcement, and some reduced recoveries from capital. You put all of that together, represents a pressure of about $2.2 million, which would have put us at 7.2%. But we were able to bring it down to that 1.9 target, largely because of some of the revenue growth that we're seeing in our planning, development, and building areas. I won't spend a lot of time division by division, but I'm happy to come back to these and answer any questions if council has any. In the general manager's office, no change in terms of FTE. This chart is reflecting the new contractual position for Tony Sergi as Director of Strategic Growth Initiatives, but no change in terms of our overall FTE. And as a division coming in at actually a 0.3% reduction over 2020. In building, there's no change over the restated budget in 2022, but you will note that the number of FTE count in building is reduced. That's because we transferred the zoning review team from building into planning at the beginning of the year. So you'll see that reflected in the planning org chart as well. And again, with the revenue growth we're seeing in building, we actually have a positive 1.6% on the building division operating budget. Looking at economic development, the only change here from an FTE standpoint, again, is the reflecting the farmers market 4.42 FTE that were moved over from the city manager's office, and a slight budget increase of 1.5% for the overall division. In growth management, you see here the 3 FTE that I spoke about earlier that were approved by council in that report in August. Those were fully fee-funded FTE, so no levy impact from them. And in fact, with the revenue growth that we're seeing in growth management, a 5.5% reduction in terms of budget versus last year. Licensing and bylaw services, there's that 3 FTE increase that was approved as part of the rental housing licensing pilot project. And the division overall coming in at 2.1%. Again, primarily what we're seeing here is the employer-related costs, being able to offset that with some of the revenues in the division. In planning, again, the additional 3 FTEs that were approved as part of the rental housing licensing pilot project, those are fee recovery, so they did not show a levy impact, and the division overall in planning is showing a 0.5% increase. In tourism and culture, no change to the org chart in terms of FTE. And in budget, a 2.3% increase. This is one of the divisions that's hit a little bit more by some of those pressures that Mike spoke about around insurance, as well as some of our facilities maintenance costs. And then finally, in transportation planning and parking, no change in terms of our org chart or FTE. This is the one area that's coming in above that council target of 2%. As a division, they're coming in at 8.1%. And this is really reflective of the fact that we have those employer-related costs, the same as we do in all of the other divisions. This is one of the harder hit areas as a result of those insurance cost pressures. We do have some loss of revenues associated with some of the parking lots that we formerly had that are turned over to development. And then the big story with parking just continues to be revenues. Revenues are continue to be significantly down as a result of COVID. In 2021 and forecast of 2022, enforcement revenues are starting to come back. Fine revenues are starting to come back. Where we're really seeing the drop is in meter revenues, in monthly permits, and in our off-street parking lots is where we're seeing this most significant revenue pressure. So with that, I know that was a lot of information. I know I went through it fairly quickly, but as I said at the beginning, I'm more than happy to go back and answer any questions about the earlier slides. And the department leadership team is here as well, if there's any questions for them.
Okay, once again, Jason, it's an excellent presentation and quite frankly, easy to follow again. It's not hard to understand it, so thank you for that. I'm looking at the speakers list and so far there's none. Can you confirm that, Madam Clerk?
No, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you might need to scroll down. We do have Councillors Wilson, Farr, Clark, and Jackson.
I got it here now. Thank you.
There you go. You're welcome.
Yeah, so Councillor Wilson, if you could put me on too, Madam Clerk, as the speaker. Councillor Wilson, you got the floor.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to GM Thorne for that really thorough and exciting overview. I have a few questions, and it's that balance between are they budgetary questions, are they policy questions that come from your budget document. So I'll try my best, and if it's not appropriate, I'll take that advice. On slide 7, you give a profile of our builds, and you made the point of saying we're building more apartments than we are single families. I think that's what you said. And from your indices or measures, are you able to tell us of those apartments, what do they look like in terms of unit size, and where are they primarily being built? Through the chair.
So through the chair, I don't have that information in front of me. I could probably try to pull that out of the data. I know in the past, following the budget presentation, we've been asked to break that down by ward. So I could certainly try to pull that information together. I just don't have it in front of me at the moment. The definition of multiples and apartments for the purpose of that tracking is any buildings with, generally any buildings with 2 or more units. So that's what's captured in there. I could tell you one of the areas we did see some growth, not surprisingly, is around secondary dwelling units. So with the new as of right zoning in place, we actually saw a little over 200 secondary dwelling units last year. If you go back and look historically, we tended to be more around 100, 125. So not a massive increase, but not too bad for really our first year of having that as of right zoning in place. So that's an area where we're seeing some growth. But if the councillor wishes, I could have staff go back and try to do a breakdown by ward that we could share.
Thank you. Just the context of my question is twofold. I know we have an outstanding family, forgive me, family-informed policy framework that will be forthcoming. And I know that there has been much made about the hemorrhaging of young families from urban centers, specifically Toronto. But I noticed that Dr. Moffat has also indicated that we in Hamilton have lost 200, I think he says, families. So the ability of us to provide a choice of places to live, including affordable apartments with more than the single unit, I think would be in our competitive interest to do so. That was the policy perspective or platform for why I asked that question. My second question is on slide 9. It talks about the gross floor area for commercial and industrial properties, and you said it's almost tripled. What I'm interested in is, are we able to in the future offer an indication of the return of that gross floor area, specifically the employee per hectare, for example, that investment is generating, the income average of that investment, and the assessment almost on a square meter basis, because we seem to be shifting. And I noticed there was a story in the Globe this morning about how some of our neighboring municipalities, in this case, it talked about Mississauga, that are refurbishing or reconstructing existing buildings from small commercial and even to large large warehouses. But my question is, what is the return on that investment on a square meter basis? Do you have any of that information available in your department that could be forthcoming?
Through the chair, I can speak to a bit of that, and Mike Zegeric may want to weigh in as well if he's on the line. I know in the past we've done sort of an estimate of, if you take that construction value overall, so that $2 billion in construction value overall, what does that mean in terms of tax revenues for the city? And of course, it depends on the makeup of it, but it's somewhere in the range of about $20 million is what we'd expect to see in terms of tax assessment coming to the city out of that new construction value overall. In terms of job generation, as you can imagine, it's fairly different depending on the types of industrial and non-residential activity we're seeing. If you look at something as like L3 Westcam, very high employment density, very significant number of jobs, a very significant high-paying jobs in a facility like that. Employment density has been an interesting one. So in the original planning for the AEGD, we used a fairly typical target of about 37 jobs per hectare, representing some logistics, warehousing, maybe some light manufacturing. If you look at something like the Amazon facility, we don't have final numbers for it yet, but that's actually probably north of 50 jobs per hectare. So they're actually a little more employment dense than a lot of people realize when you think about some of the logistics and warehousing, at least if that facility is any indication. So I can, we can go back and see what I can pull out of some of the data. We don't always have direct job numbers that come out of these statistics in terms of, that's not something that you note on your building permits. What we are hoping to launch is, we did not do it the past 2 years because of COVID, but the employment survey that we do out of the out of ECDEV and out of planning, where we actually do employer calls and door-to-door employer visits to look at what is their current, how many jobs they have currently, are they looking to expand in the future? That was a really important indicator for us. We haven't been able to do that door-to-door work for the past year or two. But hopefully we'll be able to launch that again in 2022. And I think that's where a lot of the information that councillors asking for would be able to come out of that survey work.
Thank you very much, Jason. 2 more questions if I have time, or maybe 3. We heard during the deliberation on Hamilton's urban boundary, particularly from the delegates who appeared, they were putting up presentations which showed the assessment that a property was generating on a per hectare basis. And their argument was that properties within serviced areas on a per hectare basis generate a lot more riches, if you will, for the municipality in terms of taxes. And so on your presentation, you did say the work that will be part of your department's on your work agenda will be moving forward with that firm urban boundary. Because of those presentations and that discussion, have you considered the opportunity of this exercise to look to inform our investments decisions and our ways and means in which to encourage certain types of investments as a way in which to maximize public investment dollars, whether it be in land or infrastructure? Thank you. If that makes sense, that question.
I think it does, through the chair, if I understand the question correctly. A lot of that work will flow out of the master planning work that we now do to implement the GRID's growth planning exercise. So with the adoption of that growth scenario, it's the work that planning has to do to try to look at then how does that growth get allocated around the city. And then that feeds into our master plans that REC does, fire, water, wastewater, transportation, transit. They all develop their master plans really starting more or less now over the next year to look at what that means in terms of infrastructure demands. That all feeds into the DC background study that informs the next development charges bylaw. So that's where we'll look at what are some of the infrastructure needs to support intensification and to support the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario.
I'll cut to my last question then because of time. Last week you notified council of the new hire for the LRT office, which is tremendous news. It's tremendous news that we're moving forward, in my opinion. But I was wondering, for those of us who are new on council, could you describe what will be the relationship between that LRT office and your division, for example? Because I imagine that there will have to be considerable amount of cooperation and sort of like exercises going on. And I was just, could you give a little bit of an overview on that for us? And thank you, Chair. That's my last question.
Let's do.
Yes, and through the chair, so it's not yet reflected in the PED org chart because it's not in place yet, but what we have done in the past is we will show that as a group within planning and economic development. So the LRT director who is starting is it next week or in 2 weeks, will be a direct report to me. So he'll report to me. What we're looking at is having a small LRT dedicated staff around him. So we're still working through the staffing agreement right now with Metrolinx. But overall, still finalizing what the initial, I'll call it the LRT office, will look like. It's probably in and around approximately 12 staff that will be distributed in different divisions. So if you can imagine water will need a couple of staff to do some of the work around both permitting for the ultimate for the underground the work that will have to happen, as well as sort of modeling, reviewing design, and so on. The approach we're looking to take is that those would be staff within Hamilton Water who would be dedicated to the LRT project. Similarly, in traffic, in transportation, in planning, we would have staff within those divisions who are fully dedicated to the LRT project. So it's probably in the range of about a dozen staff. We're still working on the staffing agreement with Metrolinx. Those positions are all funded by Metrolinx as part of the project. But that's the structure that we're looking to put in place. We will also most likely have a bit of a coordinating group of the key directors, such as Director of Transportation Planning, Chief Road Official, Director of Transit. We'll probably have a bit of a sort of a core group within the corporation to coordinate some of the work necessary for LRT. And then, of course, Metrolinx themselves will also establish a Hamilton LRT office. My understanding is they're recruiting their director right now, and that would be the counterpart role to the city's LRT director.
Thank you again for your presentation today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have Councillor Farr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And among many good KPIs in this presentation that I know all of us look forward to every year, we can look at a lot of housing units being built, and we got off to a roaring start this morning with that federal announcement. I thought it was a good time to let everyone know that we're well over 100 units, and all of it affordable thanks to the federal funding announcements for 3 big projects this morning. So it's a good day for this, Jason. And I just want to personally say through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that it's impressive to see such a report through one hell of a year all over the world, and the successes that you've managed, not only managing planning and economic development yourself as general manager, but also managing the pandemic as the front person for our emergency and community services. So kudos to you, and obviously to your staff who've covered for you, and whenever you've been away from the planning files and dealing with Dr. Richardson and all of us on the pandemic side. I was going to mention that we needed to make because I love using these slides for purposes of promotional purposes after I see them. And slide 23 and 24 was a great celebration of the investments, over 4 million, I believe, in cycling infrastructure last year. But you covered yourself on slides 48 and 49. I was looking for some headers and some footers there. But on slide 27, Mr. Chair, and on, again, interesting coincidence, today we learn that through council's resolve to get taxpayers out of the convention and entertainment game over many years, and led of course by Councillor Marula, who's enjoying his last budget session. But it was born, that resolve was born in a budget session when we looked at what HECFI was asking for us so many years ago, and Sam spoke up. Well, that's now evolved, Mr. Deputy Mayor, into outside investment in the HOOPEG, in the entertainment district downtown. And so through you to Jason, you did make some projections in one of the future slides beyond 27 about what we're anticipating with growth around our entertainment district. But can you be maybe a little more clear or specific, or even are you yourself observing as a downtown resident that and the head planner that people are starting to come from outside of HOOPEG seeking investment within that the confines of our entertainment district?
Yeah, so through the chair, I've not pulled together specific stats, but I can say in terms of the numbers of site plans we've dealt with in the past year or so, as well as the formal consultations, and I didn't talk a lot about formal consultations in my presentation, those were also up in 2021. And they're usually a pretty good indicator of development interest. Not every formal consultation turns into an actual project, but it's a good sense of where often we see them when potential developers are doing due diligence on a property, where they're contemplating a project. And I've not gone back and done the stats in a little while, but the number of projects within, say, a 800-meter radius around King and James is significant. There's very few, if you look at the vacant lots, the parking lots, there's very few that don't have some sort of active development interest on them, either an application in process or FCs that we've seen come through the door. So yes, through the chair, around the core, around the West Harbour GO station, and we are again starting to get a lot of questions around LRT stations and inquiries coming in saying where are the stations going to be as investors are starting to look at development potential there. So interest is quite high. I would say the drop off in 2020, we did have a bit of a drop off in 2020. It was brief. Really, by the end of 2020, we were starting to see high activity levels again, and those sustained themselves through 2021.
Mr. Chair, Jay, on 32, you have the official plan zoning bylaw amendments approval timelines, and you had mentioned, just wanted to be clear on this, that there were the 5 legacy files. And I thought I heard you say that they kind of disrupt our statistics this time around. But did I hear you say that I think all 5 are coming off the board soon or are off the board now?
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Robichaud to confirm if they're off the board now or if they are nearly off the board. But it is a problem we have with that particular indicator because as council will know, we sometimes have an application come forward. We'll accept it. We'll start work on it. We might provide an initial set of comments back to the developer, and then it goes quiet for a significant period of time. So those are the ones I refer to when I talk about legacy files. Still haven't come up with a great way to track it, so to try to make that clear in the metrics that we share, because they really do skew the results, especially for something like zoning bylaw amendments and official plan amendments, where we don't have that many. So if you have, 5 out of 20 of your rezonings being those types of legacy files, they can really skew the results. So still kind of playing with ideas as how to best present that information other than to just kind of speak to it each year. Steve, to speak to, I believe the number was 5 that we had brought forward in 2021 that were in that kind of 3-year mark because there had been a significant period of dormancy.
Good morning, Steve Robichaud, Chief Planner. Yeah, Mr. Thorne is correct. There, in 2021, we brought forward 5 applications to Planning Committee that were approximately 900 days or more in terms of how long they had been in the city from the date the application was received. We do monitor those every month with the report to Planning Committee. And as part of our sort of file management strategy, we will be sending out letters to anybody with what we consider to be a legacy file that's still active, and ask them if they still want to proceed with the file. And if we don't hear back from it within 30 days, we will proceed to close the file because we are trying to manage the issue. Very often it can be disruptive for the community if the sign is still posted and the applicant has no interest in proceeding with the application, but they see that neighborhood sign being posted. And then for those that do write back and say, yes, they are interested in proceeding with the project, then we will start leaning into those files and trying to bring them forward to a timely resolution. Some are dependent on, it might be a servicing extension or an approval that's outside of our control, i.e. a conservation authority or an MTO issue that needs to be resolved. But we will look at bringing them forward as quickly as possible. And if we have to use holding provisions to address it, we will. Other applications, some of them we brought forward is less than 90 days this year. So we're really trying to reduce the amount of time to get the routine predictable applications to Planning Committee. And as Mr. Thorne indicated, through a lot of the work that we're going to be doing on zoning reform, we're trying to eliminate the need for public, rezonings, and they can go straight to site plan and or building permit, so that they're actually getting the shovel in the ground as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Yeah,
nice background, Steve. Just over to you, Councillor Farr.
The scary thing is it's real, I'm sure. He's got skis on his feet, albeit in a sport coat. One last comment and then the question, but I'm glad to hear in both Steve and Jason's responses that we're trying to figure out a way to sort of parse it out, to identify what is legacy, because when you take out those few, we're actually batting very, very well. And so I think it's a worthy exercise to figure out a way to present, maybe in future budgets, hey, if it weren't for these limited number, here's where we're at, and I know you're gonna figure that out. Just on recruitment and retention, and it's good that Steve's with us from the ski resort, because he might want to chime in on this too. I know it's falling under his umbrella, but Jason had said, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that we want to be quote unquote the employer of choice, and this is in a time, and I think staff should confirm this, where young planners have a slew of options. It's a hiring frenzy. So I'm just curious as to what it is we're doing to get to that point where we be that employer of choice and not have what is, I think, I'm glad it was a valid concern to be reported to us today, these issues with recruitment and particularly retention. And that's my final question. Thanks.
Yes, and through the chair. So it's not just planners. It's not just the city of Hamilton. This is sort of an industry-wide challenge right now. We're seeing in a lot of the technical roles. So planners is one. Engineers, building inspectors, building engineers, zoning examiners, all of those kinds of technical roles, really tough to hire right now. I'm hearing that not just in the public sector, I'm hearing that in the private sector as well. There's a lot of competition for talent out there. As a first step, what I'd like to do and have sort of started down this path is to work with our human resources group to look at sort of a market assessment as to what the other employers are offering in terms of salary, benefit, training, development, those sorts of things, to see if we are being competitive with our municipal comparators, but also with the private sector, because we do compete with the private sector for these staff as well. So I expect that work to kind of happen over the next couple of months, and then have a better picture come summer in terms of what some of the things that we might do as employers. Again, focused on retention, which is really our first goal, is always to retain the staff that we have. But also where we do have vacancies, what can we do to fill those vacancies? That might also be looking at sort of our recruitment processes and how we're advertising positions and how we're doing recruitment and doing more aggressive recruitment. So those are the kinds of things I want to take a look at. I expect that I may be back in front of council at some point later this year with the results of some of that work. But it is a significant one for us in terms of both the time it takes us to recruit, the number of times we have to go out to market once or twice in order to fill some of the positions that we do have.
Okay, good timing. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. You're right there. Thanks, Councillor. We'll now move on to Councillor Clark.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I have 2 questions and then one that is ancillary to the presentation. I'll ask you the questions and you can refer them out. So I heard there was a number of tourists that came to the city, and I thought it was 4 million. I may have misheard it. Can I just get clarification on that?
I'll go send it to you, Jason, but Kerry may be able to answer that for you. But Jason, go ahead.
Yes, through I will see if Kerry's on the line. I'll see if she wants to answer that one. What I was referring to though was pre-COVID. So what we traditionally have in our tourism market, as opposed to what we were seeing during COVID.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask clarification in terms of where do we get those numbers from? How do we differentiate between the locals and visitors, tourists who are attending special events?
Okay, I see Kerry's cameras come on. Let's go. Kerry, do you want to answer that?
Through the chair, it's Kerry Brooks Joyner, Director of Tourism and Culture. The attendance figures are provided by the province of Ontario. They break them down first regionally and then subsets.
I'd be curious how they get their numbers too, but I'll ask them. I heard that Metrolinx is paying for the LRT office as per the OMB, which is great, or the agreement that we have with them. I thought I heard that we're going to pull staff from other divisions to work into that office. And I'm wondering why we would pull staff from any division and leave us short when Metrolinx is willing to hire the experts to fill those positions.
Mr. Thorne?
Yeah, so through the chair, so it wasn't about pulling staff from those divisions. It's about creating positions within those operational areas. So we'd be creating a position within a couple of positions within Hamilton Water, within transportation planning, and so on. What we would typically do is we would post the positions and people would apply for them. So it's possible that an internal candidate may be the successful candidate, but these would be new positions created within those areas, not reassigning existing roles, because what we don't want to do is create less capacity to deliver some of the other city priorities.
Yeah, I agree. That was why the question. So we're not seconding anyone or pulling people out of divisions. These are positions that are going to be created and then paid for by Metrolinx specific to LRT.
Through the chair, that's correct. It's creating new positions. Like I said, like any position, they'd be posted, so it's entirely possible an internal candidate would apply and be the successful candidate. But if that's the case, then they're previous role would be backfilled and would still be filled, so there's someone still doing the work that they were doing before. So yes, these would be new positions.
Thank you. My last question, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is ancillary to the presentation because I couldn't find anything in the presentation. So when I'm looking at the Ontario Lands Tribunal, LPAT, the local Planning Authority Tribunal, or the OMB, how many cases or applications are presently before those groups? And do we track what the costs are for those cases and what the outcome is?
So through the chair, I don't know if Steve's able to answer in terms of how many are currently before the LPAT. I do know that periodically over the last few years, we've given updates to council in terms of how many applications are in front of the LPAT and trying to estimate what the costs are for some of those hearings. But I don't have that information at my fingertips at the moment. I don't know if Steve does.
Mr. Robichaud, or are you coming up in the chairlift, or are you there?
Good morning. For the last couple of months, in the monthly report that we provide to Planning Committee on the status of development applications, we've included a table that summarizes the non-decision appeals to the LPAT, and that's approximately 15 files have been appealed to the LPAT for non-decision by applicants. We do not track on a regular basis third-party appeals of minor variance decisions, and it's fairly rare we get a third-party appeal on a development application where council has approved it. But we can do periodically, or working with legal, we have provided that information. We can just do a quick search on the OLT website and give you an answer as to the number of minor variance or rezoning applications that have been appealed to the OLT by third parties. In terms of the cost, it's already in our operating budget where we're going to defend council's position as it relates to that matter. We have council authorization to use the Development Stabilization Reserve to bring in external consultants as required to defend a non-decision appeal, and legal where they need to require external consultants in a report will use the Tax Stabilization Reserve if there's a need to bring in a third party to assist in defending council's decision or position on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try the OLT website and see if I can get numbers there. If not, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll go offline with Jason and Steve and see if I can get some answers to those questions. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. We move on now to Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ferguson. General Manager Thorne, firstly, thank you so much. Your outstanding leadership once again. With the magnitude of the number of directors that report to you, huge department that you oversee, and the last 6-7 months taken on the director EOC role as well. Thank you very, very much personally for what you've been doing and your really good presentation today. Couple of questions, Deputy Mayor Ferguson. On slide 57, Jason, on the org chart, you have 3 important individuals reporting directly to you in Directors Hazel, Sergi, and Manager Lally. And then in the line below that with directors, you've got a new growth management division set up, and you've got the excellent talents of Director Sergi in growth initiatives. I know over the years, you've heard me at every budget session on behalf of the growth management area talk about their bottleneck and the requirement for additional resources to help as the multitude of planning applications are coming through the process. That's where the bottleneck has been, as I've often called it. Is this organizational restructuring with that extra division and Director Sergi being in growth initiatives directly to you, is that separation, if you will, to help expedite all and implement sooner all the applications that are coming through, or is there additional benefits to doing that? Through you, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, please.
Jason?
Yes, so through the chair, a couple of things. So you'll note the Director of Growth Management position, which is Mr. Sergi's former role, is still vacant. That recruitment process is ongoing and hopefully will be completed soon. I just got to thank the managers in that area, Carlo and Rob and Alvin and Binu and Gavin, who've been rotating to fill that director role since Mr. Sergi took on his new position. So in terms of development approvals capacity, that was one of the themes of the report I brought back in August, and Council did approve the 3 additional FTEs in that area. Some of that was around the development approvals area. Another area we're having a lot of pressures around site alteration. We're seeing a lot of activity, a lot of applications for site alteration. So we're trying to keep up there. So Council approved some resources there back in the summer. And I guess that was, I don't usually come in year for those kinds of enhancements, but given what we were seeing, I thought it was important to do that back in August. So those positions were created. It includes 3 positions, as I said, within the growth management area. One of the key things that Mr. Sergi is going to be taking on the general manager's office is frankly some of the stuff that we just have trouble getting to because we're so busy dealing with individual development applications. So we have a lot of work to do around some of the more longer range strategic growth initiatives. I spoke earlier about some of the master planning work that has to happen and has to be coordinated so we can get our development charges bylaw updated. We've got some work to do around our engineering guidelines and our engineering standards. That is something that just kind of, it's always getting pushed to the back burner because we're trying to deal with the day-to-day immediate application pressure. So my hope with Mr. Sergi's role is he'll be able to focus more on that kind of work that was not getting the attention it needed. And then when the new director comes on board in growth management division with those new positions that were created as well, they'll be able to focus on that day-to-day development activity.
General Manager, thank you for the explanation. I'm fully supportive of what you've done to enhance services in that area, that important area of growth management. By the way, for the community listening in, when you say site alteration issues have increased, maybe just explain, is that like neighborhood grading issues that occur from time to time? Is that something larger within the commercial business parks? Maybe just for the community listening in, what your term site alterations mean, please.
So it can be all of those things. Some of it is tied to a development application. We also are having lots of challenges and pressures around grading in individual neighborhoods. But a lot of that activity is around the city site alteration bylaw in the rural area where we see dumping of fill, moving of fill.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And the permits required to do that. That's where we're seeing a lot more activity than we were a couple of years ago.
Some of those larger, more unfortunately contentious, controversial areas and issues. Fair enough. Lastly, Jason, and I'm sure that between you and the corporate leadership team and General Manager Zagaric, I ask this every year, with all the new investment that your department, especially in ECDEV, are doing, even during the pandemic, to bring new investment, commercial, industrial taxes, and jobs to our community, naming a few. The expansion of the Walters Group, the Amazon, the Corbic Steel, Sierra Foods, all in our business parks. Is that all reflective? Again, I ask this every year, and I just want to make sure senior leadership team doesn't lose sight of this. Is all that reflected in the ultimate financial requests that are being brought forward so that wherever we land in a couple of months on the tax increase to our community, it at least helps my office. I don't know about my colleagues, but it helps my office to say, hypothetically, if we come in at 2.9, it could have easily been 3.9, but because of the great work of ECDEV and staff and a number of these new investments, new companies coming to our city, expansion of existing companies, that because of all the additional corporate, commercial, industrial taxes coming in, your tax increases could have been, but instead are this. So just want to make sure that your department corporately is reflecting that in. Through you, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, please.
Go ahead, Jason.
So through the chair, if Mr. Zagaric's on the line, he always does a better job of answering that question in terms of how that development activity translates into the assessment growth.
That was a very nice deflection there, General Manager Thorne. Thank you.
Jason, are you there?
Or
not
You,
Jason,
Mr.
sorry,
Deputy Mayor, it's Mike Zagaric. Yeah, Mike Zagaric, General Manager of Finance Corporate Services. Staff are reflecting our preliminary figure that we're reflecting in our current position of 3.7% is 1% assessment growth. And very much appreciative of the update that Jason presented as it relates to our growth trends. And we will be presenting to committee likely in the month of February what our actual 2021 realized assessment is, recognizing it's not a reassessment period, but we'll be presenting the assessment growth. what we'll be presenting over and above what Jason and his team presented today are some of the net impacts as relates to assessment growth. So request for reconsideration and assessment appeals. So again, we're assuming 1% last year. If you're curious what last year was, it was 1.2%. That was 1.2% net, but it was 2.3% gross, meaning we had 2.3% assessment growth, but because of request for reconsideration and assessment appeals, we realized a net impact of 1.2%. So again, that information will be forthcoming in the month of February.
Thank you, General Manager Zagaric, for that reassurance. And again, Deputy Mayor Ferguson, that assessment growth, unfortunately, doesn't get the play across media lines, I would humbly suggest, as other more controversial or potential tax increases that are larger than rate of inflation, whatever it might be, they get more play. And I just want to, at least my office continually imparts upon my East Mountain community that if it wasn't for that assessment growth, tax increases could have been in an even greater fashion. So I'm grateful that staff are keeping that on the radar. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ferguson.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I wonder now if you could take a chair for a minute. I just have some comments to make if I can.
Okay, floor is yours.
Thank you, and Jason and Steve and of course Ed. I want to give a real shout out to all of you and your employees for the $2 billion in building permits. That is blowing the roof right off, and I know that's a lot of work. I want to particularly congratulate Ed and his team. I've noticed that they didn't have any increase in staff requested, but they're processing this significant increase measured in dollars. I guess in permits, we're still up there, but we've had higher years looking at slide 12. But I want to really thank them for that extra work they're doing. It's very complicated when they have to do, when you're in touch with the customer a lot by virtually rather than in person. And particularly in planning, the planning numbers are still high, well over a year to get some of these processed, in some cases 500 days. But and planning is particularly hard, I've noticed, to try to get resolutions virtually, because all these commenting groups that have to come in and the planner's stuck at home and can't walk to his files or walk down the hall to call a quick meeting with all the commenting agencies and get it resolved. So just a real shout out to those people. It's great work that they're doing. I know I'm still fielding a lot of complaints, but I find most people understand because of the pandemic, it's not as convenient or it's not as efficient. So just a quick question on that, Jason. With your other hat on, and the province is starting to open things up on Monday. At least that's the announcement that they've made. And we seem to have flattened out maybe even a small curve on the number of new infections with Omicron. Do you have a feel yet when you're going to be able to get your planning and building staff back in the building?
The benefit of your dual hat, General Manager Thorne, please.
Yes, and through the chair, unfortunately, I don't. I mean, council will recall that for the reasons that councillor articulated quite well, that was going to be the first group of staff that were coming back into the office. I guess the original date that we had announced back in November would have been, I guess that would have been last week or 2 weeks ago, was when we were targeting to bring that group back. For many of the very reasons that Councillor Ferguson did note, it is, planning, engineering are a pretty collaborative process, and there's a lot of efficiency to be had by having people sit around a table with a map or a drawing kind of laid out on the table in front of you. The other area that's a challenge, and this is especially true in building as well as committee of adjustment, is not having that counter interaction with the public can be difficult. So you're trying to discuss drawings by phone, especially with applicants that are, just individual property owners, not sort of professional architects or agents. That can be very difficult as well. So unfortunately, though, Councillor, no, I don't have yet a date when we're going to be looking to start to phase staff back into the office. Hopefully be able to have something to be able to communicate before too long. We have told our staff that we're going to be giving them sort of at least 4 weeks notice for when that will be happening, but I don't have anything at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I sort of got my fingernails gripped into my desk right now, waiting for this assessment growth. In my view, it's been very disappointing with all the building permit activity we've been having. We seem to be stuck at that 1%. And of course, with $2 billion in building permit, I sure hope Mike can come back with 2 or 3% growth. And, surely that there can't be much success now in reassessments with land values going up the way they are. And the fact that we've been able to give staff the opportunity to hire outside experts to challenge some of those appeals so that we're not seeing the growth and assessment that we would all like to see. And so that's all I have, Mr. Acting Deputy Mayor, and I'll take it back. And
Okay, Councillor, thank you.
Thank you. I have now Mayor Eisenberger. Fred?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, and thank you all for a great presentation, Jason. And you know, the city is doing extremely well given the pandemic challenges we faced. You know, the level of development has continued to accelerate, which is good news. Especially, you know, the good news on the commercial and industrial side, which is job creating in many respects. Not that other areas are not, but certainly that to me says that there are employment opportunities coming to the city of Hamilton, so critical for our city, beyond the assessed value issues, which I think is important. And I know that, you know, there's frustration around, you know, we're actually, you know, jumping ahead by two, but getting pulled back by one because of the reassessments and the different uses that are being appealed, that is holding back that assessment growth number. But the bottom line is that it's employment opportunities, and I think we should not lose sight of that. And at the appropriate time, I'll certainly be asking Mike Zagaric about the differences between the inflation that we experience here in the city of Hamilton relative to our budgets, as opposed to consumer price index, which is actually quite different. You know, that inflationary number is not something that's guiding our increasing costs and our increasing challenges as we continue to keep our city moving forward. So like you, Councillor Ferguson, I want to compliment our staff working through some very, very challenging, difficult times. And I do hope that as we did just prior to the previous shutdown, we had brought in, you know, in the first order of business, some planning staff that could start that interactive in-person process a little bit more aggressively, because it really does matter to the process and our ability to actually process these applications. So hopefully we will look at that once it's confirmed that we are in a different regime in terms of the pandemic, that we consider our planning staff coming back sooner rather than later. I think that would be a very positive step. But the growth that we've experienced is a testament to you know, the hard work of council, the hard work of our staff and our economic development department, and you know what, it really speaks to the continuous improvements in all of those areas that really leads to, I think, better outcomes for our city as a whole. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting past pandemic issues in the near term, but getting back to in-person application processes as soon as possible. So thank you to all staff that have been working hard on this. This has been a challenge, and you know, Jason Thorne, who stepped in quite easily into the post of EOC manager, has been doing double duty as both that, which in and of itself has been challenging and is difficult by itself, has also kept his finger on the pulse of our economic and planning department in a very, very positive way. And so full compliments to Jason Thorne for his dual activity here, and the very, very hard work that I know has been happening to keep both of those issues moving forward with great teams, as always, I'm sure Jason would say. But it takes leadership, and he's demonstrated that in spades. So let me just say that. Compliments to you, Jason, and the entire team for all the great work.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well deserved. And so I see no more speakers, Madam Clerk. So at this time, I'll look for a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Mayor Eisenberger, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? And as soon as we get the results, I'll go for a motion to adjourn.
Councillors oops, I got it. Councillor Nan, are you able to vote? It just popped up. I have them all. That carries 15-0.
To adjourn. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? You have to leave. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Good job, Mr. Chair and staff. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.